John worked the bar with practiced ease, his hands moving automatically as he poured drinks for the diverse patrons who frequented the space station's neutral territory. His quiet demeanor and unassuming presence made him invisible to most, a perfect fit for someone who wanted to be left alone. The alien guards, towering and intimidating, often came through. They treated him like any other lowly worker, their dismissive glances reinforcing the anonymity he craved. But there was more to John than met the eye. Beneath his calm exterior lay the scars of a life he had tried to leave behind. His sharp reflexes caught a falling glass before it hit the ground, drawing a few murmurs of surprise from nearby patrons. He smiled faintly, but his eyes betrayed nothing. To most, he was just a bartender. To those who paid attention, there was an edge to him, a precision that didn't belong behind a counter. The station thrummed with activity, a melting pot of alien races and cultures. Conversations flowed like the drinks, and John listened quietly, always watching. The guards often spoke of Earth, a planet long abandoned after its devastating fall. Tales of a legendary warrior who had led humanity's last stand were whispered among those who dared to recall the past. John served them all without a word, his face unreadable as the stories swirled around him. One evening, a new face entered the bar. She was unlike anyone John had ever seen. Lira moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her shimmering silver eyes scanning the room as though she could see right through it. When she sat at the bar, her presence demanded attention, though she seemed oblivious to the effect she had. "What's good here?" she asked, her voice soft yet confident. "Depends on your taste," John replied, his tone neutral. She smiled, a disarming gesture that momentarily broke through his defenses. "Surprise me." He prepared her drink without further comment, setting it in front of her. As she sipped, she studied him openly, an unusual boldness in her gaze. "You're different," she said after a moment. He shrugged. "I'm just a bartender." Her laughter was light, almost musical. "Maybe, but there's more to you, isn't there?" John didn't answer, instead wiping down the counter as if her words hadn't struck a nerve. But something about her lingered, her curiosity sparking an unfamiliar warmth in him. As the night wore on, they exchanged a few more words, simple, unassuming, yet enough to leave an impression. When she finally left, John found himself watching the door long after she had gone. The alien guards returned later, loud and brash, their presence unsettling the room. One of them knocked over a chair, barking at John to clean it up. He complied without hesitation, his movements calm and controlled. They didn't see the quiet fury simmering beneath his surface, the restraint of a man who had once commanded fear across battlefields. No one ever looked twice at the bartender. That was how he liked it. Lira became a regular presence at the bar, her visits frequent enough that the other patrons began to take notice. She always chose the same seat near the end of the counter, close enough to speak with John but far enough to avoid drawing unwanted attention. Their conversation started simply, questions about the station, light remarks about the eclectic mix of aliens, casual observations that often made her laugh. Over time, their exchanges grew deeper. Lira spoke of her work as a scientist, her mission to broker peace between the warring factions that threatened the galaxy. She was earnest, driven by a sense of purpose that seemed to light her from within. John listened more than he spoke, but his occasional insights revealed a wisdom she found both intriguing and comforting. "You seem to know a lot about conflict," she said one evening, her gaze steady on him. He hesitated, then replied, "You learn a few things when you've seen enough of it." Her curiosity was piqued, but she didn't press. Instead, she shared her own struggles, how difficult it was to get opposing sides to even consider peace, let alone commit to it. There was a vulnerability in her voice, a weariness that made her seem less untouchable. John found himself drawn to her in a way he hadn't expected. Her presence was a reminder of something he thought he'd lost long ago, hope. But he also knew the danger of letting someone in, especially when his own past was a minefield of secrets. One night, after the bar had emptied out, Lira lingered. She asked him about Earth, about the rumors she'd heard of its fall. Her tone was gentle, her questions careful, as though she sensed the weight of the topic. "I was there," he admitted after a long pause. Her expression softened. "What happened?" He stared at the counter, his hands stilling as he gathered his thoughts. "We fought. We lost. And then we were betrayed by the very people we trusted to lead us." Lira didn't interrupt, giving him the space to continue. "I did things I'm not proud of," he said, his voice quiet. "Things I thought were for the greater good. But when everything fell apart, I realized it was all for nothing. So I walked away." There was a heaviness in the air after his words, a silence that felt almost sacred. Lira reached out, her hand brushing his. "You survived," she said softly. "That matters." Her touch sent a jolt through him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. For a moment, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could find something worth holding on to again. But even as their bond deepened, a shadow loomed over them. The alien guards began watching them more closely, their suspicion barely concealed. Whispers of John's true identity reached Lyra's ears, though she chose to dismiss them. Still, the unease grew, a reminder that peace was fragile and trust was dangerous. Lira stood in the dimly lit corridor, her heart pounding as she replayed the words of the alien guards. They had cornered her earlier, their imposing figures blocking any chance of escape. Their ultimatum was clear: get close to John, learn everything about him, and report back. Failure would mean the destruction of her research and the safety of her family. At first, she tried to resist, insisting that John was nothing more than a bartender. But the guards didn't believe her. Their threats grew darker, and Lira knew she had no choice. Betraying John was the only way to protect what she held dear, but the guilt was already eating away at her. As she entered the bar that evening, her eyes found him immediately. He greeted her with a faint smile that had become so familiar, and her resolve wavered. She tried to convince herself it was just a task, that John would never know, but the thought didn't bring her any comfort. The guards didn't give her much time. A few nights later, they stormed into the bar, their intentions unmistakable. They approached John with an air of authority, their hands resting on their weapons. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to choke on. "You've been hiding, haven't you?" one of the guards sneered, stepping closer. John didn't flinch, his calm demeanor unshaken. "I don't know what you're talking about." Lyra's stomach turned as she watched the scene unfold. She had hoped the guards wouldn't act so soon, that she would have more time to figure out a way out of this mess. But now it was too late. The guards didn't wait for an answer. One of them lunged, his weapon drawn, but John moved faster than anyone could react. In a blur of motion, he disarmed the guard and sent him crashing into a table. The room erupted into chaos as the other guards charged, but John was already a step ahead. The quiet bartender was gone, replaced by a warrior whose every move was precise and devastating. He fought with an efficiency that spoke of years of experience, his instincts honed to perfection. Within moments, the guards lay sprawled on the floor, groaning in pain. Lira stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She had heard the stories, the rumors of Earth's greatest warrior, but seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. John turned to her, his expression unreadable. "How did they know?" he asked, his voice low but charged with accusation. Tears welled up in her eyes as the weight of her betrayal crashed down on her. "John, I didn't want to." "Didn't want to," he interrupted, his tone sharper now. "But you did." She tried to explain, to make him understand the impossible position she was in, but he held up a hand to silence her. "I trusted you," he said, his voice breaking. "I let you in, and this is how it ends." Before she could say another word, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing amidst the wreckage, her heart shattered. John sat alone in the small room he called home, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't quiet. The events at the bar played on an endless loop in his head: Lyra's betrayal, the ambush, and the look in her eyes when she tried to explain herself. He had trusted her, let himself believe there was still something good left in the galaxy, and it had cost him. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't push her from his thoughts. There was a sincerity in her tears, a desperation in her voice that didn't align with cold manipulation. He didn't want to admit it, but a part of him still cared, even after everything. The sound of a soft knock startled him. Before he could react, the door slid open, and Lira stepped inside. Her face was pale, her expression a mix of determination and regret. She held up her hands to show she wasn't a threat. "I know you don't want to see me," she began, her voice trembling, "but you need to hear this." John didn't respond, his eyes narrowing as he waited for her to continue. "They're not done," she said quickly. "The guards, there's a larger group coming for you." They've been tracking you for months, and tonight was just the beginning." He remained silent, his jaw tightening. "I didn't have a choice," she pleaded, stepping closer. "They threatened my family, my work, everything I've been fighting for. But I'm not here because they sent me. I'm here because I care about you." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. For a long moment, John said nothing, his gaze locked on her. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" he finally asked, his tone cold but wavering. She took a deep breath, then placed a small device on the table between them. "This is a secure route out of the station. If you stay, they'll kill you. I'm risking everything just being here." John studied her, searching for any sign of deceit. But all he saw was a woman trying to make amends, risking her life to warn him. Against his better judgment, he felt a flicker of trust begin to rekindle. "You didn't have to come," he said quietly. "I couldn't live with myself if I didn't," she replied. For the first time, John let his guard drop. "I'm leaving," he said, picking up the device. "But this doesn't change what you did." "I know," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed you to know the truth." He hesitated, then reached out, brushing her cheek with a calloused hand. "Maybe someday," he said softly, before stepping past her and out the door. Lira stood there, watching him disappear down the corridor. She wiped her tears and straightened her posture, her resolve hardening. She would finish what she started, fighting for peace, for redemption, and for the faint hope that their paths might cross again.